Welcome to part 8 of Don't Say Schwarzenegger, my story about surviving an attempted unaliving and the aftermath of corruption and cover-up, and the A-list celebrities and politicians and their family members who are involved in different ways in this story. Before I begin, I just wanted to say that as of today, I'm officially being shadow banned by TikTok. My views, even though I just started posting like 10 days ago, and I've gotten over 3 million views and suddenly 20,000 followers in the last 10 days. And my posts are averaging 300 to 500 views in the first minute. And I posted just a quick little post a couple hours ago. And instead of 500 views, it had 60 views suddenly. And as of right now, I think it has maybe 100 or something when it should have a couple thousand, whatever. So something in the atmosphere has happened as of the last 24 hours. So I want to just ask everybody to please share my videos. Please ask friends to share. Please ask friends with high follower counts to share, because I haven't even gotten to the darkest part. I haven't gotten to the craziest evidence. I'm literally just about to start that. So this is really interesting. I have a lot of stuff that I was really excited to share for the next 24 hours that I'm not sure if anyone's going to see anymore. So now, part 8, back to this. It's the continuance of day 3 of the preliminary hearing, and I'm on the stand. And I'm going to try to do this quick because honestly, it's part 9, the next part that I post, where I'm really going to drop some receipts and evidence. But so day 3 continued. I get on the stand. I got on the stand. I immediately identified all 3 Drizzes, Maurice Drizz, Alberto Daniel Drizz, and Sean Drizz, as all of them attacking Jacob Castellan, the TMZ paparazzi. I identified Alberto Drizz as my attacker, and I went over my injuries. And my injuries were traumatic brain injury, skull fracture, a softball-sized lump. My jaw was swelled 4 times the size with a divot in it that lasted months. I ended up obviously losing a lot of work, so I lost my health insurance when I needed it the most. America. And then Thomas Mesereau, who is Alberto Daniel Drizz's attorney, he ended up saying, kind of trying to get me to answer the question and try to say that my injuries were my fault, that they assaulted me. And he actually said, where is it? You think you just have no responsibility for any injuries you suffered? No, you don't make people assault you. So that was that. And then we're done with day 3 of the trial. And then we move into day 4. And by the way, the trial was only like the witnesses on the stand, all that stuff. It was only 5 days. And then we get into sentencing, and that was 1 day, and it's over. So we're at the very end of the prelim hearing. So day 4 now. The day 4, the deputy district attorney, and I'm going to refer to that as the DDA from here on out because it's just a lot of words to say. So the DDA, he caught Maurice Drizz and Alberto Drizz switching chairs again, after the judge had admonished Robert Shapiro and them for doing that because things were clearly off after they were caught switching glasses and stuff. So they were caught again, they were admonished again, and then Sean Drizz's attorney, his name is Donald Rhee, he actually said that the fence that I jumped over was 6.5 feet tall. So Robert Shapiro says it was 7 feet tall. Donald Rhee says it was 6.5 feet tall. And in Sean Drizz's 2018 deposition under oath, he said the fence was 8 feet tall because they're all trying to say that I lied about it, that there's no way somebody my size could jump it. It's 6 feet tall. I have a video of me standing next to it with measuring tape and stuff like that. So that's that. That's the end of day 4. Oh, I'm sorry. It's the end of my testimony. And I'm just going to leave it at that because I have some really, really important stuff and really insane receipts where we're going to get into racketeering in the next part. I just don't know if anyone's going to see it. So if you see it, like it, comment, share it, please. And also if anybody has advice on what to do when you're shadow banned, because TikTok hasn't sent me a message saying, hey, you violated community guidelines, hey, you did this wrong, whatever. I'm being blatantly shadow banned. Like, it's wild. How did I go from 1 million views and just going up. Like every day my analytics are like, you're going up 500%, 3,000% in followers, likes, engagement. Every day it's going up. And today it's like, pew, like the line goes way down and I'm getting 100 views. So I think I'm going to create a YouTube. I don't know. I need to figure out something. I'm just new to all this stuff. So please, any and all advice would be amazing. Please answer, give me advice, ask your friends if they know what to do in a situation like this, because I'll listen. So thank you again, everybody, for caring so much and supporting me so much that corporate is like, nah, silence. Shh. I really appreciate it. The next part is going to be bananas. It's going to be bananas. So please stick around and I hope it's seen by people. Thanks. Welcome to part 9 of Don't Say Schwarzenegger, my story about surviving an attempted unaliving and the cover-up that ensued. My story involves a lot of A-list celebrities, politicians, things like that. So today I'm going to be covering more of day 4 of the criminal trial, and I'll just be talking about one person's testimony who is the manager, was the manager at the Nice Guy. Before I even mention anything, he's a really great person and he told the truth on the stand. So he gets on the stand, and by the way, everything I'm going to tell you, I have to be very clear. This is what the transcript, the official legal transcript of the criminal trial, this is what the transcript says. Okay, there's a difference between what it says and what happened for this part. Okay, so the transcript says that the manager comes out and he sees a man on the ground just getting wailed on by another man. So he tries to pull that man off multiple times, and then Sean Driz, who he identified, Sean Driz came up behind him, threatened to unalive him, and then hit him in the back of the head, and then he was assaulted, and he had injuries from trying to help the man on the ground. So then Shapiro tried to say that the defendants were actually very injured too, and he produced some photos, which I will post after this post, which is just, ugh. But they have like Band-Aids, a couple Band-Aids, and they're making faces like, oh, woe is me, like, and it, in my opinion, looks like a very, very amateur makeup artist job of depicting like bruises and stuff. I'll post them. And he said, to the manager, do these injuries look familiar to you? And the manager said, no, sir, they don't look like what I saw. And when he showed him the injuries of me, he was like, yeah, she had that tracks. Like she had a softball-sized lump on her head when I saw her that night. So now let's skip ahead. So that was 2016. He testified. We didn't know about this until a couple years later, until I bought the transcripts and read what everybody said. And I was like, oh, okay, so this stranger, the manager, came out and testified. That was really cool of him. I wonder who he saw, if that was one of the other two plaintiffs, the men. So now let's move forward to early 2020, 4 years after the trial. I get a DM, and it's from the manager. And he says, hey, I've been seeing your stuff you've been posting about what happened all over IG. I just came across your page. I'd always wondered what happened to you. I hope you're okay. I was there that night, and if you have any questions about it, I'd be willing to answer them. I hope I'm not triggering you. It was a very nice message. And so I responded, yeah, like I'd absolutely like to talk to you and hear from you. But I didn't want to do it over the phone. I didn't want to call him because I was worried I was getting catfished, or maybe somebody paid him to enter my life down the road and try to get information or something, because things like that had been happening. I haven't gotten there yet, but so I figured if he was going to lie to me, it better be to my face where I can look in his eyes and I can call him out immediately, because I would know. So I asked him, well, let's meet for lunch. And he said, okay. So we met for lunch. I drove like an hour and a half, 2 hours away to wherever he lived. And we met for lunch at this really nice place by the ocean. It was very calming. And the second he walked in the door and sat down at the table, I just sensed that he wasn't full of BS. I could sense kindness about him. And the weird thing is for the hour that we sat there eating food and talking, we never talked about the case, the trial, nothing. It was more like, how are you since then? What's your life like? Like, oh, you have a wife and kids, and like, okay. And like, we're chatting about all this stuff and just kind of getting to know each other in like a gentle way, I guess you could say. And the check comes, and we're getting up to leave. We still hadn't talked about what I drove an hour and a half to talk about. And I remember going to hug him. And as I was pulling away, I said, hey, before I go, if you could just tell me in your own words what you remember from that night, that'd be great. I was like, I already know what you said on the stand. I've got it memorized in my head. But I just want to hear it out of your mouth. So he's like, okay. So he says, I came out of the bar, and that's when I saw a woman on the ground, and she was being assaulted by a man. And I tried to pull him off of her, and he was like, it's just, he said he worked in the bar industry for years, and it just hits you different when it's a woman being assaulted by a man. And he, described the whole attack that he witnessed and the reason why he came and testified a year later at a trial for complete strangers. Because he was like, it's just different when a man is beating an unconscious woman, Like, I had to testify. I've had things happen in my life when people didn't stand up for me, and I wanted to do the right thing. So, and so I remember giving him a hug, and my response was like, okay, thanks. Wow. And it hadn't hit me yet what I had just heard, and I get in my car, and I'm driving up the 405 North, and about 10 minutes later, driving, it hit me what I had just heard, the information that I had just received, and I had to pull my car off to the side of the road and just break down on the side of the 405 for like 15 minutes, just pounding my steering wheel, yelling. I was angry, I was relieved, I was feeling betrayed for so many reasons. So I immediately text him, I need tissue. I immediately texted him, hey, the transcript says that you saw a man getting assaulted. It never said you saw a woman being assaulted. Are you sure you said that? And I sent him screenshots of his testimony immediately. Like, I raced home, sent him screenshots of his testimony, and I said, you need to look that over. Like, what do you think? And his response back, he texted me, he said, I've always said I saw a man beating up a woman. And I don't or would ever use the word disadvantage, like in the transcripts. And then he says, I don't recall ever saying another person. It was always a woman. So how much time do I have? Okay, I'm going to read you just like a half a page of his testimony, like the meat of it, of what's in the transcript, the illegally altered criminal trial transcript. So this is between him and an attorney. I think it was Shapiro. And so this is what he says in the transcript. It says, one person on top of the other punching away. Shapiro, the person on the ground, did you recognize that person? Manager, I didn't recognize the person. I didn't take time to guess who it was. I just saw somebody on the ground and somebody at a disadvantage. Who calls a woman being... Okay. Shapiro, did you see the person standing over him? I did see the person. Did you recognize that person? No. That person standing over the other person on the ground, is that person here in court today? No, sir. What did you see happen next? When he said no, sir, we think that maybe he was referring to possibly William Jolson, the fourth man in the civil trial. So anyways, the manager then says, I reacted at that point. Like I said, I saw somebody at a disadvantage. Initially, the person that was standing over, I kind of pushed them out of the way. I attempted to get the person that was on top of the other person. I tried, this is a huge lesson in pronouns. So for some reason, a top-notch, famous, long-time practicing criminal defense attorney, they would never say, the person who is on the person and the person on the person, they would never do that. They always make you clarify. So what you're saying, sir, is the man and the woman, and this and that, plaintiff number one, defendant number two. This has been illegally altered. And another time, a few pages down in his testimony, they changed it again, where he says, the manager says, I pulled him off of a victim on the ground. So then I was just a victim. So I'm they, I'm them, I'm person, I am person at the disadvantage, person on the ground, somebody at a disadvantage. I'm going to upload screenshots of all this right after. Somebody went as far as to change all of the pronouns so that the star witness to my attempted unaliving would be taken off the table, so that instead of the conviction being attempted unaliving, the convictions were then all lowered to GBI felony assault, which is the lowest one below attempted unaliving. GBI means great bodily injury. So that's the reason why they don't call it attempted unaliving in all of this, but I'm always going to refer to that, because if the defendants want to sue me for calling it the wrong thing, they can. Bring it. The discovery would be breathtaking, because this is part of the discovery. So, okay, I got through that. I reached out to the stenographer, and she also told me that the audio files had been stolen and destroyed, because I wanted to listen to those to compare them to the altered transcript. So that's that. I wonder who has the power and the soullessness to do something like that. Who could it be? Don't say their name. Welcome to part 10 of Don't Say Schwarzenegger, my story about surviving an attempted unaliving and the corruption and cover-up that ensued. And my story involves a lot of A-list celebrities, politicians, and their offspring. So today I'm going to be covering just the final witness of the criminal trial. We're finally there. We're getting close. And the final witness was an LAPD officer who was at the scene of the crime, after everything happened, taking initial witness statements from all of the witnesses and the victims. So very important. So this officer's name is Officer Ron Bone. He gets on the stand and he immediately starts talking about what TMZ paparazzi Robert Sirachi had told him that night. This is very important because this whole story changes drastically after the criminal trial ends, and then we head into the civil trial a few years later. It's like a whole different scenario. So the LAPD officer says that Robert Sirachi told him that night that he was standing out there with the cameras, him and his coworker, Jacob Castellan, the guy I tried to save, that they were filming, that, the Drizzes start trying to berate the valet guy, and so they step in, and he witnessed Sean Drizz assault Jacob Castellan. Then he says that he himself, Sirachi, was then assaulted by 5 to 6 of men that were all the friends there of Sean Drizz. He said he was assaulted so badly and savagely that he lost consciousness. He was unconscious. So it's interesting because all this happened, and after the criminal trial, there was no lawsuits or anything from Robert Sirachi to the Drizzes, no lawsuits, and even Jacob Castellan even tried to say that we were unethical for suing. Like our injuries weren't that big of a deal. So they're trying to downplay everything. And also he said in this civil trial down the road that Sirachi wasn't even present, wasn't a victim, wasn't a witness, nothing. He just happened to be driving by after everything happened that night and then got out of the car to help his friend go to the hospital, whatever. So Sirachi's in some trouble because this is serious stuff. So he also says that Sirachi told the Officer Bone, he also said that Sirachi told him that he witnessed the men move from him over to another victim on the ground. So there's another witness that's taken away. He's not there for civil anymore. He's disappeared. So now one of my star witnesses to my attempted unaliving has suddenly disappeared into the atmosphere because he wasn't even there. He wasn't even injured. So that's interesting. So then Robert Shapiro starts asking Officer Bone about those very important notes that he took that night, because we need those for the criminal trial. Guess what? He asks him where everything was, but he couldn't answer the question directly. He couldn't come up with the report and the notes that he took from Castellan's statement, Sirachi's statement, or mine. He actually said, and I quote, "The notes are lost." So at that point, this is so sketchy. So the amazing Judge Michael E. Pastor, he interjects because he's not an idiot. He's so on it, which is probably why he was immediately removed before sentencing with no explanation. So the judge says, he interrupts, and he says, where is it? He said, "Did you destroy the notes?" Point blank. And the officer was like, so the judge says again, "Did you destroy the notes?" He says he doesn't know where the notes are, but I still have them. So he doesn't know where they are. He also admitted that he never handed those over to the DA. He refused. The LAPD refused to hand these notes over to the DA, over to anyone to be used for the criminal trial. They have them, they just don't know where they are. And that's where they left it at. Another funny part, I thought so at one point, Robert Shapiro asked the officer if Anne Green had said that she walked out of the nice guy bar. Because remember, they're trying to say, this fence was 100 feet tall and there's no way little old me could have done it, and I must have made it up. And Officer Bone says, yeah, I believe she stated that she jumped over the fence. And the whole trial, they kept saying, Anne didn't tell any officers that she jumped a fence. Nobody said that. And he's like, no, she said that. So they had little hiccups here and there. So that is about it. I think we can kind of move on over to the closing statements and all of the charges and all that stuff. Officer Bone also said that he left nothing out, even though he's just committing to memory for this trial a year later. He left nothing out. He totally forgot to mention the whole phone call on speakerphone with Sergeant Yearwood and him telling us about the brothel and the Schmex workers and stuff that were a part of the special night for the Driz twins that night for their birthdays, and that's sweet. So that was it. Oh my God, this is my shortest one. Yay, under 10 minutes. Okay, so I'm going to do part 11 today. I'm going to make sure I do it. I'll get it posted. Thank you so much to everybody for sticking around. I know it's a lot of information. I know it's a lot of times, dates, places, all that. But you guys have been amazing, and there's a lot happening in the background now. I'm starting to feel supported. I'm starting to feel believed and heard, and that maybe there's a chance there'll be justice for me. So, and everyone else that's affected by this, because it's a social issue. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. Welcome to part 11 of Don't Say Schwarzenegger, my story about surviving an attempted unaliving and the cover-up and corruption that ensued. A-list celebrities, politicians, their offspring, all that stuff. So today we're at the very end of the preliminary hearing. We're in the closing statements. We're finally done. This is about a year since the assaults happened. So now closing statements. So Robert Shapiro starts off. And this is just something I forgot that was in the transcript that I just wanted to read out to you guys because birds of a feather. But, you know, I tried to post something, screenshots of tweets that I found of Sean Driz's, like, right before the attack happened. And he uses the N-word freely, publicly. This, like, kid from Beverly Hills High School. But so I noticed in the transcript, in the closing statements, that Robert Shapiro actually said, when he was talking about the photo lineup that the witnesses had to use right after the attacks to identify who attacked who, and I quote, he says, "So you have an elderly Caucasian with no facial hair whatsoever, and then a gallery of 5 other people who look like hoodlums. What's the opposite of an elderly Caucasian with no facial hair?" I'm just wondering what he calls hoodlums and why. So when he doesn't know, he's just looking at pictures. Anyways, so then Shapiro then continues to lie on the record, and he says, you know, Anne says the fence is about 4.5 feet tall. I have never said that in my life. He then says, we know it's 6.5 feet tall. I went back and I measured it like a year after the criminal trial. I measured it. I have the video. It's exactly 6 feet tall. So again, all these really rich law firms that if you're going to go to them for help, just remember they can't afford measuring tape. So then Sean Driz's attorney, he gets up and he's doing his closing statement and he opens with, Anne lied. The fence is 6.5 feet tall. Like, does anybody tell the truth here? This is crazy. So anyway, so that was that. Let me get to the next part. At one point, Thomas Mesereau, who is the attorney for Alberto Daniel Driz, he gets up and he actually tries to say something about Maurice Driz, the other twin. He says, you know, it stands to reason that if Mr. Maurice Driz was beaten this badly at his age, given the way he was dressed, no history of any criminal report, which is interesting because what you guys don't know yet, and I'm going to get into detail later, that at the time of the criminal trial in 2016, that the twins, Maurice and Alberto Driz, were both under investigation and then found guilty of schmexual battery of an underage girl. Both twins. Yeah, you can look it up. They were ordered to pay $500,000 to her, and I don't think they paid her, but we can get to that, and we'll make sure she gets paid. So literally saying they're not under any criminal investigations except for little girls, I guess. So we're just gonna pretend that didn't happen. So we get through all that. So now let's move on to the DDA. The DDA gets up, Deputy District Attorney. He gets up, he gives a case summary, all that stuff. And he, you know, mentions how bad, I also want to mention one last thing that Thomas Mesereau, the attorney, said, that he was referring to those, like, injury pictures that the Drizzes submitted, and he described it as It's unalterably true that Maurice Driz was pounded to a pulp. His face was beaten to a pulp. He's in bed. His eyes are swollen. He has swollen cheeks. Redness all over his face. Did anybody else see those pictures of like the little like paper cut with the Flintstone Band-Aid? Yeah, it was harrowing. I'm still traumatized. It was really hard to look at. So anyways, so we get into the DDA. Sorry, I'm bouncing around a little bit. I just want to get this out. The DDA does a case summary. How much time? Okay. And we're going over all the counts and all that stuff. And he's talking about how much, oh God, I can't swear, how much stuff has been laid out by the defense. So he even says, and I quote, because these are things we didn't know because we weren't present in the courtroom when each person was testifying and stuff. But the DDA said to the court, in fact, the person who was able to distinguish Alberto and Maurice Driz, twins, despite them switching chairs, switching glasses, switching suits, switching ties, and then he goes on and on. I forgot that they were switching ties and suits, but I did have written down that one of them one day was wearing like a bright green and purple tie, and then the other one would wear a cashmere like V-neck sweater. Very different outfits, so that if you switched them, they're just very particular. You know, you can't mistake them. So that was a little wild. That was a little wild, rereading as I was rereading it this morning and going, they switched suits and ties too? Of course they did. Of course they did. So then we get into the counts. There was 6 counts, and 1 through 6. So 1 was like the not so serious violent felonies. Counts 2 through 5 were GBI, great bodily injury felonies. And 6 is a serious felony as well. And that was just Sean Driz because he threatened to unalive somebody who was trying to save my life. So here are the counts. Alberto had counts 1, 3, 4, and 5. Maurice had 1, 3, 4, and 5. And Sean Driz had 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6. So those are the counts. And then we're just going to cover one last little thing, which is really interesting, which we didn't know again until I bought the transcripts and found all this. So I want to just say something. The amazing, amazing Judge Michael E. Pastor, who was there for the chair switching, the suit switching, the lies, the aggressiveness towards me on the stand, all of it. He saw all that, he just saw all of this inappropriate stuff happening. So he's going to be amazing for sentencing, right? Because nothing gets by this guy. He's awesome. And he says, during closing statements after they're done, the judge says, "Let me indicate I find the conduct of each defendant in this case extraordinarily violent and dangerous and a threat to public safety." The Shrivers and the Schwarzeneggers didn't think so because of the support, the private support that I uncovered over all these years. They didn't think so. They didn't think my life was worth enough to be protected, and they don't think any of your lives are worth being protected as long as their daughter's girlfriend gets to go on yacht trips with them every year. Yes, I have pictures. We're going to get to that too. So then the judge says, okay, now first off, when they were first arrested they were arrested, remember I said Shapiro brought them all down to the LAPD when we were there, and it was like they were in and out in an hour for GBI felonies. This is insane. And the judge was like, how did that happen? And why was their bail made for $30,000? Because you have to pay 10% of your bail. So $3,000 each is what they had to pay. And that's extraordinarily and unprecedentedly low for violent felonies like this, for attempted unaliving. This is not a thing that happens. So he asked about it. And Shapiro interjects, and Shapiro goes, well, I personally drove them down instantaneously to the Venice Police Department and surrendered 3 of them. I think that was a basis on which the magistrate at the arraignment decided to keep the bail at the $30,000 limit. I have a question for everybody that has a black friend, a person of color friend, who's ever gotten in trouble with a felony. Have they ever gotten a lower bail, the lowest possible bail, because a well-to-do, famous, rich attorney said, I drove him down here? Is that a thing that happens? Because if it is, then I might be wrong and angry for the wrong reasons. But if it's a thing, let me know. I'd love to know if there's a precedent for that. So then he says that, and this is interesting. The DDA then says, where'd it go? Okay, sorry. So the DDA then says, this is interesting because he was cut out of these proceedings. He wasn't even told or allowed to be at these initial proceedings, right? Like when they got arrested and stuff. He says, I was not at the initial arraignment. If I had been, I would have actually asked for statutory bail. When I got assigned after, I was advised by the court that they'd already rendered it at $30,000, and I was never really given an explanation on how that occurred. Interesting, right? They were immediately released. They were allowed to not have a DA in the room. They just kind of did it all themselves, a little hustle. So I think that's it. I'm going to stop there, and then I always say I'm going to film another one and get it out next, but I'm going to try to do it today. We'll see. I just kind of go fetal after these. So we're done with sentencing, and the next several parts, like, I don't even know, 4, 5, 6 parts, I'm just going to use just to talk about all of their felony probation violation hearings and all of the 0 prison time that they all got for those. Thank you so much, everybody, for supporting. I'm going to keep them coming. Welcome to part 12 of Don't Say Schwarzenegger, my story about surviving an attempted unaliving and the cover-up and corruption that ensued. A lot of A-list celebrities, politicians, and their offspring are also involved in this story. So today I'm going to be talking about the sentencing part of the preliminary hearing. So about a year after, this takes about a year since the actual incident. I'm going to back up real quick because before sentencing, the entire prelim was presided over by the amazing Judge Michael E. Pastor. He gave the 6 counts to the defendants for each victim that they, GBI felony assaults. Most people were beaten while unconscious by them. So this is very serious stuff. So we have 6 counts for each human being, each life. The judge was also responsible for catching the LAPD officer on the stand, destroying notes. He caught the Drizz twins switching clothes and switching seats to confuse the witnesses on the stand testifying against them. All this happened. So when you have a new judge come in, they don't read the 1,100-page transcript. The transcript is broken down by the court into minute orders. And these minute orders are like a tiny, truncated, not even full sentences, but this is like what happened, but it's not verbatim. So this new judge comes in not knowing all the extra stuff that happened. And she's reading the illegally altered minute orders of the illegally altered transcript. So what she's seeing is that my star witness never existed. So there's a lot of important points here. So I also want to just say one more time, I'm going to repeat what Judge Pastor said at one of his final things he said before he was replaced at the previous hearing 6 months prior. He says, "I find the conduct of each defendant in this case extraordinarily violent and dangerous and a threat to public safety." So we get to the sentencing, and now we have Judge Catherine Mader, she'll be here for sentencing, and then she's going to oversee most of the felony probation violations that I'm going to cover along the way. So the defendants, they asked for, usually GBI felony assaults, you'll get 7 years in prison. That's just standard. The defendants' attorneys asked for 45 non-consecutive days to be spread out over 5 years. So if you spread that out over 5 years, you could technically do 1 day in jail every 40 days or so. Also, they asked to not go to prison. They asked to do a private jail of their choosing, a private facility. That means pay to play. When you go to a private facility and you pay for it, specifically the one that they went to, Seal Beach Detention Center, you get a private cell, you get a flat screen in there, you get a full-size refrigerator, and you can come and go for work, and you can have all your food delivered. So they can have, they can have Madeo and Four Seasons deliver food all day long. They can have everything. This is what they were allowed to do. And this judge said, yeah, sure, why not? But she said, but not 5 years, because that's wild for something like this, for a GBI felony assault. She said, how about you do the 45 days non-consecutive over the course of 1 year? Can you do that? And they were begrudgingly oh, I guess. Then they were like, well, Your Honor, for example, Sean Drizz's attorney, Donald Ree, says, well, my client's working. We were hoping to just do weekends. Blaze Pizza. This is after the convictions, after the arrests, after the investigation of the underage girl that the twins were found guilty of schmexual battery of an underage girl. This is after all of that. And Blaze Pizza was still employing them at this point. You know how they're business partners with Maria Shriver and Patrick Schwarzenegger and all them. We'll get to that. So then one of the attorneys, I believe it's Maurice Drizz's new attorney, he replaced Shapiro. sort of. Mr. Worksman says, well, Alberto and Maurice jointly manage a business, Blaze Pizza, so our hope was to stagger their time. They plan on doing weekends, 2 weekends a month, completing maybe within a year, end quote. So then the DDA says, and I want to be very clear, this DDA pretty much had no power throughout this thing. He kept fighting for us. He kept saying multiple times in the transcripts that his supervisor, the DA, Mr. Holmes, one of the DAs, there's a billion of them, Mr. Holmes is the one that cut this deal behind closed doors with the defendant's attorneys. And he says, my supervisor, Mr. Holmes, he allowed this because this allows the defendants to maintain their jobs at Blaze Pizza. Okay. And he said, then turns to the defendants. Hold on, did I get this? Okay. You know what? Let me cover this real quick. So then the DDA turns to the defendants and he says, okay, so because you're pleading to a felony, you'll no longer be able to own, use, or possess a deadly weapon. In particular, a pew-pew. Bang, bang. You know what I'm saying? I can't say that word on TikTok. So, and then he lets them know that this is a strike offense. Let me read that straight from the transcript. If you pick up another strike in the future, it will not only double it, it will add 5 years. If you pick up 2 strikes in the future, it will subject you to 25 to life, plus 5 years for each prior strike, which could mean a minimum sentence of 35 to life in prison. I'm going to cover all of the felony probation violations. After I do this part, I'm going to start covering all of those. So you see that? Sorry, I'll never do that again. But I'm going to cover all that. And guess how many days I got in prison for all of those probation violation? And guess how many I have on video and photos of? More than one. So let's now get to the worst part of this part, because it gets worse, I promise you. So all the defendants pled no contest. And then we get to the part that I tried filming this a couple times already today, and I kept crying, and I have to keep refilming it because it just it reminds me of how, here we go. It reminds me just how I didn't feel like a human being when I found. Okay. The DDA then says, gentlemen, again, this is what his supervisor did behind closed doors. Gentlemen, as I explained to your attorneys and I explained to you earlier, we're dismissing the remaining counts besides count 4, which was my brother's count. So what that means is all of the other human beings that almost died that day, all of our criminal counts were dismissed off the table. And they were only doing the 45 non-consecutive days in private Seal Beach jail for 1 life. When I was talking to the DDA on the phone when he told me about it, because I didn't go to that hearing, I just wasn't up to it. He called me. I remember I was house sitting for a friend, and I just remember sitting in the driveway, I cried for like hours, and I broke blood vessels in my eyes. I didn't feel like a human being. It's hard remembering how that felt. Well, okay, where was my train of thought? So they pled no contest, all of that. They had to be completed in a year. The rules of the sentencing, they had to keep their parole officer informed of all work, home addresses, and phone numbers. That's going to be important soon. They're not allowed to possess firearms and deadly weapons. That's going to be very important coming soon. And they have to stay 100 yards away from all the victims and have 0 contact. So no talking to at hearings, no texting, no Instagram, nothing like that. That's going to become really important too in that stack I just showed you. So all the counts for Jacob Castellon, Robert Sirachi, myself, the third plaintiff from the civil trial, and the nice guy manager that saved my life, all the counts were dismissed. Oh, and then at the very last thing that happened, there was a provision made that if they got into a fight at Seal Beach Jail or brought in a cell phone, violated the rules, then they would not be thrown into prison or county jail. They would be moved to Orange County Jail, which has no authority over LA County stuff, but this was a provision that we made to help them so it would be easier on them. And then the last thing is the judge finally ended the sentencing with letting them know that the bail, and I quote, the bail is exonerated, What that means is each defendant didn't have to pay the bail that Judge Pastor in the previous hearing he took it from the $30,000 that was made from day one, and he was like, $30,000? That's not even what? No, it's going to be like, I think it was somewhere around $250,000 just for Sean Driz, and then like maybe $150,000 or $175,000 for each twin. And then this judge said the bail is exonerated; you don't have to pay it. So, yeah, trying to feel like a human. Thank you so much, everybody, for all your support. Welcome to part 13 of Don't Say Schwarzenegger, my story about surviving an attempted unaliving and the cover-up and corruption that ensued. My story involves a lot of A-list celebrities, politicians, and their offspring. Today, we are at the very tail end of the prelim hearing, so all the defendants have been convicted of GBI felonies. They've received 5 years probation and 45 non-consecutive days in a private jail of their choosing to be done in a year. We found out that the twins, Alberto and Maurice, were ordered to do AA twice a week for 3 months. And we found out that Alberto Driz owns a company called United Medical Devices. And because of that, he claimed that he needed to travel to Mexico twice a month. This hearing, this is like the very end of 2016, so about a year and a half later after everything happened. For this hearing, Sean Driz was not present. He skipped court. This is the day of the impact statements of the victims, and he just didn't show up to the mandatory hearing. The other person that wasn't present was my brother, because he got cancer months after the incident, and so during this hearing, he was recovering from chemo, radiation, and a bone marrow transplant. Okay, so the travel requests. Alberto, Maurice, and Sean, the three Drizes, they requested to go to Aspen for the last week of December, and then Sean requested to go to Cabo the week after that, the first week of January 2017. Sean also requested that he just be able to travel whenever and wherever in the continental United States because for business reasons. The judge responded to that request by saying, we have no idea what his business is, because at this point they had all claimed that this ruined their careers and that Blaze Pizza fired them all, which isn't completely true. But so she said, we have no idea what his business is. And then she granted all of their requests. Like, fine, sure. Which the funny thing is, too, the next hearing we had a few months later after this, the judge, I quoted her, Judge Catherine Mader said, I regret letting them go to Aspen and Cabo and all that, because they ended up just a few months later claiming that they couldn't afford to pay restitution to the victims. So this is the beginning of a lot. So now we get to the impact statement. I was the only one that gave one. I was the only one that was there. Right before I got on the stand, Thomas Mesereau, who is Alberto Driz's attorney, and also he's represented Danny Masterson, Bill Cosby, wonderful people like that. Mesereau, about 3 feet away from me while I was talking to the DDA in the courtroom, Mesereau said, so do we have to wait for what's-her-name to give her statement? And laughed. So that was an interesting, that he called me what's-her-name. Interesting. So also, before I gave my impact statement, I'd had months to prepare for this, so I had been writing it and editing it and all of that stuff. And I had written, for the first time, a public statement about what had happened to us the night before this hearing. And I put it on Facebook and Instagram and let the world know, the small world, it didn't go viral or anything, but I let everybody know what happened. So when we got to court for this morning, they were all talking about it, and so the DDA pulled me aside 2 minutes before I got on the stand, and he said, hey, Judge Mader told me to tell you that there's 2 rules for your impact statement. You can't talk about your, being upset at the lenient sentencing, and you can't name her. So there goes 80% of my impact statement, and started crying immediately, trying to hold back tears, and then it just came out. So now I'm going to read you my impact statement, and I'm going to translate a little bit some words because I can't use them on TikTok. So, okay, so I get on the stand and I say, April 17th, 2015 was one of the most disturbing, horrifying nights of my life. There are a number of people involved that were attacked, but I'm just going to speak on my behalf. It's been a year and a half, and I still spend days in my room, in my bed, crying myself to sleep, waking up in tears. Last summer, I lost my home, this beautiful place I was living in, something I could call home, within 2 months of being assaulted by all the defendants. I couldn't work, I couldn't pay my bills, and I even lost my health insurance when I needed it the most to deal with the skull fractures and the 6 doctors at Cedars-Sinai told me to see. the neurologist, plastic surgeon, psychologist, general practitioners, everyone. I had to stop seeing them at the end of the year because I couldn't afford it. I work in front of the camera. I do modeling and acting. There came a point about 6 months down the road when I couldn't even look in a mirror. When I did, I was actually saying, I hate you. I felt like nothing. I felt so insignificant by what you men did to me, what I had to witness you do to the other people in the street that night. I'm seeing 2 therapists. I don't know if it's helped. I can say I'm better now than I was on April 2015. I was never having dark thoughts, but after I found out the sentencing of 45 days each, I had dark thoughts. I Googled ways to deal with dark thoughts. That was the darkest moment and the lowest moment I've ever had in my life. And I've had low moments in my life, dealing with the financial stress of everything, seeing my brother and my best friend have an emergency surgery a month later because you kicked in his stomach so hard he had to have his intestines removed. 9 months later, he had cancer. And right now, he's not here today in court because he's recovering from a bone marrow transplant. He told me to tell you today that you can call him. He said that this incident caused his cancer and that he can't prove it, but the domino effect of the stress, the emotional scarring is a result of everything that has happened. Since that evening, with our strong support system of people that love us and care for us, it's still so difficult on some days to get out of bed and have confidence in humanity and people. And even for me, trying to help the TMZ guy who is having his head bashed in by the 10 of you, even by me helping him, I know it was the right thing. I've had moments in the last year and a half where I've wondered if it was worth it, if it's worth stepping out there to help a stranger. What kills me is there was a part of me that hoped at the preliminary trial that there would be some sense of being apologetic from you guys, a sense of shame. I even expected, a part of me thought maybe one of you would come over and apologize in the hallway. And I'm not kidding. I would be so different in the way I'm feeling my anger and sadness. So different if any of you had apologized to any one of us that you assaulted. None of that. None of that. So we're trying to heal on our own and trying to wake up every day and get out of bed and remember that people are good. I've always loved people and had faith in people. And you guys shook that. You guys shook me to my core. There's no point in it. There's no reason for you guys to go and attack people like this. You had every chance to back away. You had 40, 50 chances that evening. People screaming to stop. People pulling you off, begging you to stop, and you didn't stop. You've had a year and a half to think about what you've done. I only hope that when you guys are alone at night and you think about this and you understand the pain in my heart and in my eyes and looking at you and speaking from the heart, not even reading from this, I just hope there's a part of you that understands how deeply you have affected me. How deeply. And a part of me, I want you guys to heal. I want you guys to grow from this. I hope you do on behalf of every other person you interact with on this planet. I hope for you guys. I really do. I don't know what else to say. That was it. I got off the stand. The judge said, okay, thanks. Is there anything further? No. And then they immediately switched over into dealing with the calendar for the next hearing. The judge didn't acknowledge me, say anything. I remember Mesereau snickering as I got off the stand. Okay. I hope that's the last time I ever have to read that. The next several parts are going to be me covering all of their felony probation violations and all of the 0 prison time that they got as a result, and the rewards they got as for the violations. That was fun. Thank you so much, everybody. This is not easy, but it's been really cathartic. Getting it off my chest and being seen and heard and believed and supported, it means so much. Thank you. Welcome to part 14 of Don't Say Schwarzenegger, my story about surviving an attempted unaliving and the cover-up and corruption that ensued. A-list celebrities, politicians, and their offspring are also involved in this story. So one thing I wanted to get into before I go into probation violation number 1 of the Drizzes is that from the sentencing hearing that I spoke about in the last part, there was a quote I forgot to read from the judge. And the judge was told by the defendant's attorneys that they just don't have the money to pay restitution to the victims for, all our medical bills, all that stuff. So the judge said, and I quote, Judge Catherine Mader, "I thought that these defendants had money so that they'd be able, if they didn't have much jail time, to pay back the victims," end quote. So what she's saying is she gave these guys less jail time for GBI felonies because they're wealthy. I don't think that's how it's supposed to work in the justice system, but I'd love to see what you guys think about that. So now we are in probation violation hearing number 1, which is mid-February of 2017, which is less than 2 months after the sentencing of the 45 non-consecutive days in a fancy private jail of their choosing, which is Seal Beach Detention Center. And this is also 5 months after they were convicted. So they couldn't even go 6 months without violating probation. And guess what they did? Guess what these violent men did for their first probation violation? Sean Driz, Maurice Driz, and Alberto Driz, all 3 of them showed up to their private fancy jail, because they're doing weekends. And Sean was 11 days in to his jail time. And the 3 of them showed up drunk, aggressive, intoxicated, trying to fight people. So they even had their blood alcohol contents checked, with the little, I don't know what it is. It's a machine or something. Sean Driz, Maurice Driz, and Alberto Driz all were caught. So it was like 0.06, 0.06. They all got caught with alcohol in their systems, which is a clear violation of felony probation. So, we were even actually told by the DDA, when we found out about the lenient sentencing, he was like, but don't worry, Ann, these guys, there's a good chance they're going to violate probation, and we don't need to even have a blood alcohol breathalyzer or anything to prove it and to send them back to prison. When they're found guilty, which they are in the prelim, all we need is a little bit of evidence, as in, and by little, he literally said, a photo of one of them holding a glass of wine or standing in a bar. They're not allowed to be in a place that sells alcohol. They're like a bar. They're not allowed to be around other felons, and they're not allowed to even be caught. You can't have a picture of them holding a beer. So this was really interesting. So we were like, okay, well, maybe it'll happen. So we're all really excited. We're like, wow, they're actually going to spend legitimate time in prison for what they did to us because now they're caught. So it starts off, and Sean Driz's attorney, Donald Rhee, he says, probation indicated there was no violation. Now, I want to get to that. So the probation officer for the Drizzes was a woman named Denise Montalvo. And I had spoken to her on multiple occasions throughout the years, and before I ever thought, wait a second, is she giving very lenient, is she not doing her job ethically, is I guess the way to say it? After a few decisions I saw that she made. But she even told me one day over the phone, she said that she had heard, I called her to let her know that the Drizzes, the twins, had showed up to a hearing or a meeting or something. I think it was a hearing for another court case they had of violating another woman's boundaries. I'll get into that in the future. But I found out that at that hearing, they looked really disheveled, as if they hadn't slept in days, type of disheveled. So I called the probation officer, told her this, and she responded to me and said, actually, I noticed that last time I saw them, they looked really disheveled as well. That's really great. I'm going to note that down. So I was like, okay, cool. So the judge says in this hearing, she says, Alberto and Maurice were terminated from the jail program, but not Sean Driz. Again, he got somehow, they're all doing the same thing, and he's doing something usually worse. And he was told that Sean was allowed to finish his 45 days in the private fancy jail, while Alberto and Maurice were kicked out and they weren't allowed to go to any other fancy jails. So then Thomas Mesereau, one of the criminal defense attorneys, says about Sean, he says, the probation officer said the rules do not specify that an inmate be sober upon check-in. We don't care what Seal Beach Fancy Detention Center has for rules. That doesn't override the felonies that they got in LA County in Los Angeles. That has nothing to do with it. But in this hearing, they allowed this to override Judge Catherine Mader and everybody that was in our court case, as if it didn't even exist. So the probation officer, Denise Montalvo, put in a letter saying, having alcohol in your system upon check-in is not a violation of the rules. Again, doesn't matter what Seal Beach says, but they're using this. They're standing up on this. So then Thomas Mesereau said, look, it's a violation of common sense, but it's not a formal violation of probation. And then Maurice Drizz's attorney, Mark Worksman, says, and also, and he's really excited to add this in, he's like, and they haven't even been arrested any more times since the last time. So they were really excited about that. Like, they get a sticker on the fridge or something. I don't know what happens with that. The DDA then says, and the DDA was amazing, and he said in court, he was like, look, the defendants aren't supposed to have any alcohol. It's zero tolerance. They're on felony probation for a violent crime. And he said if they can't serve their sentence, that is a probation violation, which it is. Then Thomas Mesereau, he's Alberto's attorney. He goes, yeah, but Alberto has diabetes and Maurice has sleep apnea. So, they can't go to county or prison because, whatever. Then the judge says that the probation officer wrote, it can't be a probation violation when the rules don't specify you can't do that. Do you need a letter to say that you shouldn't father children with a goat to know that you're not supposed to do that? Because I'm wondering, it's crazy. Then another attorney says, look, they're ordered to obey all laws, but it's not a law to show up with alcohol in your system to jail. It's a felony probation violation. So they also noted again that because of the felony convictions that Maurice and Alberto had been expelled from Blaze Pizza, but they never mentioned Sean, which is very interesting. And I also have more to add in the future about what expelled from Blaze Pizza means. And again, we're going to start talking about fraudulent transfers to other people, business partners, family members. We're going to get into that. So then this hearing ends with Thomas Mesereau, Alberto's attorney, says, look, this is interesting. He says, and I quote, I don't think it was understood at the sentencing, which was just a couple months prior to this. He says, I don't think it was understood that all the Blaze Pizzas were all going to be pulled. They had 12 locations that they owned at the time. And they didn't know, and Blaze Pizza didn't tell them. So somebody's lying. Either Blaze Pizza's lying to the public, I'll tell you about that soon, or Thomas Mesereau is playing dumb and saying, well, we didn't know that they were going to pull the locations of ownership from them. That's exactly what that means. You can't be on current felony probation for a violent crime to own a franchise at Blaze Pizza, and most franchises, I would think. So anyways, when he said that was 3 months after the convictions. So what they're saying is Blaze Pizza never pulled any of the ownership 3 months after convictions. And I just want to let you know too, when I posted for the first time publicly on IG about what happened to me the night before I gave my impact statement in December of 2016, Blaze Pizza ended up, everybody started commenting on Blaze Pizza's Instagram, and Blaze Pizza, everybody was commenting stuff, and they started writing a copy and paste message below each person's angry message, and they kept saying, we are appalled at the behavior of Alberto Daniel Driz, and we are in meetings right now to remove him from ownership. And they only said him. They didn't mention Sean. They didn't mention Maurice. Nobody ever mentions Sean. He's very coddled in this. So that's a huge thing for Blaze Pizza to actually say we are in meetings right now, and I'm going to put those screenshots up next. Because it means nobody forced their hand until I went public, and then the public got angry and then went to their IG. So it's really interesting. So that's the end of this probation violation. They said, so Sean's allowed to stay in, fancy private jail, and the twins actually had to go to county jail and spend the remainder of their 33 days left. So they went there, but I'll let you know how that turned out for those last 33 days. Okay, we're at the very end of 10 minutes. So, all right, I guess we'll move on to what happens with this and then the next probation violation. Thank you guys so much for following along, supporting, commenting, sharing. Definitely some of my posts are being suppressed, so I really appreciate you guys with all of your amazing support. Thank you.